Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of spiritual.
On here today with Jesse Harless. He is a leader and facilitator in the addiction recovery and mental health space. As CEO of Entrepreneurs in Recovery, he facilitates highly experiential online and in person events to help individuals and purpose driven organizations harness their strength, elevate purpose, and build safety. Jesse holds an MA in clinical mental health counseling from Riviera University and is a FEARS coach, HeartMath certified trainer, and best-selling author of If Not You, Then Who. To learn more, visit jesseharless.com. Jesse, you and I were just talking a second here. You and I met. It's been about 4 years ago, and it's amazing to see. You were saying you had just started your journey. How far you've come along now, and even then, I was a fairly heavy drinker then, at that point in time, and I don't think we ended up doing a podcast. We did like an introduction. We had some conversation. What's interesting that I'd like to share with you. I mean, it's been nearly 4 years since I've had a drink. So it was shortly after you and I connected that I stopped drinking and had some spiritual experiences myself, which led into spiritual dope. So welcome back. It's great to reconnect and love to hear kind of what's going on with you right now.
Yeah, well, congratulations on 4 years of recovery. That's awesome, and,
Yeah,
what a journey I'm sure that's been,
sure.
and yeah, I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to have the discussion with you, and, 4 years later, it was 4 years this month when I started, out as an entrepreneur and left my job, so interesting
Yeah, that must
timing.
have been a hell of a journey, right? And a little scary, no doubt. Especially the past year or so, probably kind of scary for you in terms of like how's this all going to work out. Um, I like to start these off with the whole idea, Jesse, that you and I are vehicles for source energy, God energy, whatever whatever you feel like that is, and it speaks through us. And if there's somebody on the other line that's listening in on the podcast today that's going to hear a message that can only be delivered by Jesse through this podcast at this time, what is that message today, Jesse?
Well, I mean, just like anything, I'm living by my heart and intuition. So it's whatever needs to come out today, whoever's listening to this, that's what's going to come out. And that's how I live. I'm an intentional person, intentional man. I set intentions every day and then I let go. It's about who I'm being, not what I'm doing. So that's really where I'm at today is just letting go.
I love that. It says, I had a guy when I was doing the Fatherhood for the Rest of Us podcast who didn't like the word intention. And I really, I really couldn't put a finger on it. Has anybody ever kind of given you pushback or guff using that word yourself?
No, I think if you know the definition, then you understand what it means, and you understand that it's a very powerful word. Just means what is your deepest desire, your primary motivation. That's all it is. It doesn't even have to be spiritual. It's just your deepest desire, your primary motivation. So instead of me getting up and saying, "Oh, I'm going to get 7 things done today, and I'm going to do all this stuff," and I'm going to do that anyways. So instead, I'd rather set intentions and be like, my intention today is to be present. My intention
Mm,
today is to be here now. My intention is to be connected. So that's how I look at it. Just a way to get clear on my primary motivation and deepest desires for the day.
right. No, I mean, that's perfect. And to be honest with you, that was mine too. I was like, how can you have a problem with the word intention? There's something behind it. Like there's something kind of like purpose driven. And like you're saying, you're following your kind of heart and intuition, and you couple that with like the intention, and you've got something really to drive after with that. And also saw that you're a heart math trainer as well. What's that been like for you to kind of hop into that space and you know I, are there people out there that might call that pseudo science, and like what's your reaction been there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people call eating fruit pseudoscience. So I mean, it's just it's each his own, and I think Heart math is something that came into my wheelhouse after I went to the global event in Mexico. I was a co-facilitator. I was invited to go out and meet the founders, and they ran this big global event. So as I facilitated on stage with them and got to feel out their tribe and the people who were involved, over 100 people, I said, wow, there's something to this. Let me investigate it. And they have all this technology. They have all this technology that actually, there's a piece of technology called the inner balance, and it actually can monitor heart coherence. So if that's pseudoscience, then I don't know what science is, because that's backed by 400 peer-reviewed studies, the actual work that they're doing. So, you know, if anything, it's more science than other science I've seen because of the amount of studies they have. So, yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about. It's not stuff we were taught in high school or growing up, but definitely really something interesting to know that the heart in itself can take a memory. And this whole book's on this. And the heart has its own nervous system. And I don't think people understand that. And that's okay. But it would be worth maybe researching. So, yeah, so I got certified in what's called Heart Math Interventions Program, which is for, I'm a clinical mental health counselor. So, like, it's one of the things that I've done in a past life, but not really a past life. I did it for my master's. And I did that training, which is for practitioners, and then I went on to do the what's called activating the heart of teams, which is bringing heart math into companies. And so, yeah, it's been quite a journey. It's really interesting to use these self-regulation techniques. So they're not teaching like meditation; they're teaching self-regulation, which is probably the most important thing we could have ever in the history of the world, is learning how to self-regulate, especially during all this pandemic stuff and all the stuff we've been through. So, yeah, it's a really interesting um, it's a really interesting business concept, and I think that once you explore that, it's backed in a lot of the science of the heart and what we know about heart brain coherence. It's really much deeper than what I think people understand.
From a super high level, what is heart brain coherence?
Well, it's a ways for your actual physical heart to start to get into harmony and balance with your actual mind. And the way that can happen is through deep breathing is one of the ways, or this conversation. As we get into this conversation, we're going to feel this sense of, like, not exactly flow, but you could call it that. Might be one way to describe it. And that's coherence. It's like these perfect sine waves. So if both of our hearts were connected to the inner balance machine, we would actually see this coherence between both of our heart rate variability. So there's a space between the heart rhythms, or the heartbeat, and the space in between the heartbeat is these heart rhythms. You can measure them. And if you're angry and resentful, which you might have been before when you were drinking all the time, that is, we would have hooked up your heart, or let's say, not your heart, but hooked up your, let's say, with that machine, it actually is Bluetooth and connects to your ear. So we would see through your heart rhythms that you would have this rigidity. We would have saw this rigidity in your heart rate variability because you'd have been angry, resentful, probably a little snappy. But when you're in the flow, and now maybe at times in the morning during your coffee or prayer, you're in this state of coherence, and we can actually see these perfect sine waves, which is these perfect waves that are created when you're in this state of heart brain harmony. So that's the most simplest way. There's scientific ways to explain it, but to keep it really simple, there's just the heart and the mind coming into balance and coming into harmony, and you do it all the time. It's happening all the time, but you can also measure it now, which is kind of neat.
And that being able to measure that, does that allow you to figure out ways to get it into coherence? And if I'm kind of following a little bit here, that would also help you in your self regulation.
Exactly. It's all about self regulation, because if you're in a state of coherence, you are regulating your state, your emotional state, your spiritual state, your mental state. It's coming into balance so that you're actually feeling like, oh, and by the way, the studies that they've shown is that even your immune system is boosted. When you're in a state of coherence, it can actually boost your immune system. It can really release certain hormones that help boost the immunity. So it affects your memory, it affects your performance. So if you want to have higher performance, you want to have greater memory, getting in a state of coherence. This is what athletes do. This is what CEOs, tech startup people who are really trying to get out there and make a difference in the world. They'll use these coherence techniques. They're called coherence techniques or self-regulation techniques, but they're specifically called coherence techniques. And this is a way for the mind to have like, and some people would say, like, if you're talking about Joe Dispenza and these different people, they would say you'd have super memory, and again, some people would call that pseudoscience, but other people would say that's changed my life. So it's one of those things where, um, when I was on the outside of it, just kind of looking in, it was kind of like, well, I don't really know. And then when I was deep inside of it and having all the studies and reading from all these doctors and really looking at the work and then doing it myself for over 2 years, that's all the anecdotal evidence and actual peer reviewed evidence that I needed to be like, wow, this is something that's happening all the time in teams. High performing teams are in a state of group or team coherence. And that's why they're performing at a high level.
So outside of where I work, I've never heard anybody else really kind of talk about like high performing teams, right? So I'd love to kind of touch on what that looks like uh from this perspective. Like what's it look like to um approach like a large business, right? And I think that we're on like this cusp of this type of conversation being easier and easier to approach like a large business to say, hey, I want to talk to you about your team and your heart mind coherence and how that can be beneficial to you. What's the reception like? What's the pitch like for that? And then what's the reception been?
Well, to back it up a little bit, so heart math is not my primary selling tool.
Okay.
So I'm a professional facilitator. So I've
Hmm.
been trained in what's called exchange facilitation, and so that's what actually taught me how to actually get in front of people and actually how to make conversations worth having happen, and create a state where there's actual opportunities to experience change. Where instead of being you know the guru with all the answers at the front. I'm the guide on the side who's helping people to facilitate conversations worth having that the company is not having. And so coming into a company, that's primarily what I do is I help them tune into their innate resilience. Now, on top of that, as a small segment of the time I have with them, which could be a 60-minute lunch and learn, or it could be a 2 hour or 3 hour event, I will bring in something like a heart brain coherence technique because this is being used by state troopers. This is being used by the US Navy. This is being used by major institutions. So I'm bringing that in at one piece to teach them how they can self regulate, which is a huge thing for HR because with the rise and climb of marijuana and rise and climb of alcohol use and mental health decline in the workplace right now, which is probably the worst we've seen, there's never been a better time to start to teach self-regulation techniques. But that's not the primary reason I'm hired to come in. My primary reason for coming in is to teach innate resilience, to teach them to start to be able to co-create or crowdsource their highest strengths, crowdsource success factors of why they're a high performing team. So that's kind of primarily where I'm coming in. And then when I'm there, it's like sneaking the medicine with the cheese. Now that I'm there, now I'm going to teach them a technique that they're not going to be learning during their 9 to 5. I'm going to bring it to them as like a heart math certified trainer or a clinician because I'm technically
Right.
a clinician. So I'll bring in to teach self regulation only for a small segment of it, but it can be a significant opportunity for them to start to just practice deep breathing and heart brain coherence.
I got you. Let's talk a little bit about the path of like headed into sobriety, right? Like what were some of the things that flipped a switch for you, got you into wanting to be sober, and what are some of the steps that you took? Who was the Jesse before this Jesse, right? And the reason I like to do this is one of the things that I was actually interviewed last night by a similar podcast. It's like some people forget where they came from, right? And it's like, all right, well, where Jesse, you might have been a sinner before you became a saint, right? And so who was the sinner Jesse versus the saint Jesse that we're seeing right now, and where's the transition?
Well, you got to ask yourself, what is addiction? What does it even mean? So, if we know what the definition of addiction is, which is addiction is, according to Gabor Mate, is anything that you do repeatedly that causes pleasure in the short term, but has negative consequences in the long term. So when I say that definition of addiction, I just called out about 99% of your audience that they have addiction, or probably 100%, because there's something in their life that they're doing that does have pleasure. Maybe they're eating at night at like 11 o'clock at night. They're still eating, food addiction. Maybe they're caretaking. Maybe they're people pleasing. Maybe they're all about validation at work. These are all addictions. So, you know, for me, my addiction. Hold on one second, Brandon. I just gotta grab a little sip of water here. Thank you. So for me, addiction started with trauma because trauma is the root cause of addiction for most people. Now, when people say think of trauma, they think of sexual abuse or they think of physical abuse, but that's not just what trauma is. Trauma includes that, but trauma could be your best friend moving away when you were 9 years old. Trauma could be the divorce your parents had at 7. There's many different ways that people experience trauma, which is can be physical. It can affect your nervous system. So for me, when I was a child, my dad left at 4, never came back, never saw him again in person. And he was also in a car accident, put him in a coma for 22 days. So he had brain damage permanently. So at 4 years old, I experienced significant trauma, and then we moved a bunch of times. So from that point on, it set the stage of how I was going to self-regulate my emotions, how I was going to regulate my little nervous system. And the reality was I didn't have a lot of coping mechanisms. So what ended up happening is I found ways to numb out. And then eventually I picked up physical substances like drugs, like alcohol. But that didn't come till later. That came probably when my first year of college. I had dabbled before that, but when I got that first year of college, that's when I started to really jump into substances and alcohol. And then when I flunked out of college, which then added to my trauma because now I'm the only son to ever attempt college and I failed. I'm the only person in my family to attempt college and I fail. And so now I feel the unworthiness again, which is an addiction and a trauma in itself because you can become addicted to your unworthiness. So I actually felt like a piece of shit. And then what ended up happening at 20, my father died. And even though he wasn't in my life, when he died, it was the first time I used cocaine. And so that's all it took at 20 was for me to have that experience and chase after that for the next 2 years to bring me all the way to a place where I was going to go to prison because of it. So that's kind of what happened to me. That's my story. And then I found recovery at 22 and it wasn't like an option. It was like prison or recovery. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do the recovery, of course. I'm not going to go to federal prison because I didn't have state level charges. It was federal. So I'm like, I'm going to change my life. So at 22, got into recovery. And then from there, recovery kept evolving. So what recovery meant at 22 and what it means now, 16 years later almost, is different, but some of the fundamentals are the same. So that's kind of the higher level backstory of that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And Jesse, just because, right? Sometimes some people are still stuck, maybe in between, right? In between, like, hey, maybe I'm going through recovery right now. But my life has always been shit, and I've always had this unworthiness, and I've always been looking for these ways to numb out, and I don't know if my life's ever going to turn around. And you're proof, though, of like, how can you take what you went through and turn it around, and turn it into something useful for others, right? How can you, all right, now that you've been through this process and you figured out ways to regulate, and you figured out some of the signs and symptoms, and you've got a way that you can help people now because of what you've been through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's lived experience. I've helped a lot of men. I've helped a lot of women throughout my last 16 years. I'm very blessed that I was able to do that. But I also learned a lot about addiction and I learned a lot about myself. So I think
Mm,
that's the key is like at some stage of the game, you have to take a look at your own deal. You have to look at like what's really running my life. Am I running my life or is my trauma running my life? Am I running my life or is my emotional addictions running my life? So that's really where, for me, I had to take a hard look at that later into recovery. I wasn't even able to see a lot of that until later on in recovery to really understand the role trauma plays and the way that emotional injuries that had happened in the past were still playing into adulthood. And it was causing me not to step into the mature masculine man. It was still
mm,
keeping me stuck. It was keeping me in that loop of a wounded spiritual ego. And I see a
Yeah.
lot of that happening in recovery. So I think that that's where, for me, that's the stage of the journey I'm in now. I wasn't there 10 years ago, but now I'm in that
Mm,
stage of the journey of taking a hard look that there was no initiation into manhood. There was no, steps for me to feel whole and feel like I could step up and do what I needed to do. And now today I do feel that. And one of the reasons is because I have gotten out of my comfort zone. I have faced a lot of fears, and I've done it with a lot of support, because I realized that asking for help was the number one thing that is the wounded masculine, is not asking for help, even in recovery. So that's where, these are things that took a while to come into my wheelhouse. These are blind spots. But once I surrounded myself with certain men, certain people that could understand that and were living that, it was like, oh, wow, this is how I want to live now. And
mm.
that's when, entrepreneurship and this idea of a new type of freedom started to happen, because I realized that, like, oh, I'm still operating in many ways, from loops that are happening when I was 20. So that's
Mm.
not serving
Right.
me as a, as
Right.
a, as a, as a, as a loving adult.
You're talking about like the wounded ego, spiritual ego, in recovery, and people getting kind of stuck in the loop. What's something that you've been able to learn or figure out that can help somebody get past that?
Well, I think a lot of people are stuck, and they're like stuck in ways that they don't even understand, like, that there is a way out, because they're already in recovery. So they kind of feel like this is it. Like, I don't think it gets better than this, but I'm just grateful. But that's the whole problem. It's like, but I'm grateful. It's like, no, you're not. So the reality is you're not grateful. So what are we going to do about it? And part of it is really getting clear of your purpose. When you start to get clear of your purpose, that's when all of these things pop up. As soon as you're like, oh, I'm going to go write that book, that's when all the trauma comes up. Oh, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to travel here. I'm going to take my family here. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to start this business. All of a sudden, all these fears come up. And what we can do is we can numb out emotionally, or we can run towards them, ask for help, get a coach, talk to someone who's been there, get a mentor, and then go forward towards the fear. Feel the fear and do it anyway. So it's kind of like that idea that your fears are the compass to where your full potential is. So that it's that simple. Like, if you're feeling that way in recovery, and especially if you're not feeling that way because you're not in recovery, either way, you can actually feel it when you go out and go to do something that you know is going to benefit your life, and you can't do it. Those are the things that are blocking you from your purpose. And you can say divine purpose, because I believe we all have one of those. So that's the compass. And so when I left my job 4 years ago this month, I came up against the greatest fears I ever faced, because I realized, like, oh my God, I was playing it small inside of the company, not living out my true potential. And as soon as I left and I had to figure things out, it was like, oh my God, what did I do? But it was also the most exciting journey of my life, because I could finally start to see how I was playing much smaller than what I'm capable of. And 4 years later, too, it's still expanding, it's still growing, because when you're on your own, now you have to figure out how you're going to make a living without having someone to support. And, there's nothing wrong, by the way, with having a job. I'm not knocking a job. I had it for 18 years. But what I'm saying is, for me, I had to make the jump, because I needed to get that on the other side of that healing, so I could help others and serve others.
That's awesome, right? I think that the idea too of surrounding yourself by some of those strong and encouraging men to get you there, right?
Yep.
And having that kind of support, and then you're talking about that jump too. I always have another buddy of mine that I always make the joke of nobody makes their first leap, right? It's very matrixy, like trying to make that leap from your corporate gig, and you kind of got almost a protection there, right? And then now you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna drop all that. I'm gonna try and make this jump. And in the movie, of course, he falls and hits his face, and it's all kind of bloody. It's just like it's all in the mind, though, right? In the Matrix, right? Real similar to these fears that you're butting up against. It's almost. I was thinking about. Did you ever do that science experiment where you put the penny on top of the water? Surface tension? You
No.
never did that?
No.
So, I mean, basically, you can float a penny on top of water just because of the surface tension. That's real similar to our fears, right? You can do it, and there's that tension right there on the edge, but right past that edge is where the breakthrough happens,
Hmm.
right? Everything kind of opens up, and that's where the growth is, and it's unlimited, right? I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. That's what I'm hearing you say too, right? Like
Yeah.
it just keeps growing and
Yeah.
growing and growing.
Yep. Yeah, it never stops really. Because when I thought I had it, you know, the beginning of this year was one of the hardest times of my life. And I figured out, well, no, the hardest times of my life are over. They're already past those. I already had those when I
Mm,
was 22. And then it
sure.
happened this year. And I realized that, like, oh my God, there's higher ceilings I can get. I can break through higher ceilings. And that's what happened this year. And it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. So that's where, you know, it's exciting because there is unlimited growth potential. And I think that's what life is about, is living on that edge, but like not living on the edge so that like you're drinking alcohol and doing drugs every day and you're barely making it by. That's not what I mean. I mean like living on the edge of like, oh, I'm a little too comfortable right now. I need to figure out where can I push myself and also take care of myself. Put myself first and have the self-care needs so I can serve my family. But also, what is the edge? Where can I be today that can help me to really grow? And for me, like there's always an intention. That's why it goes back to intentions of like, my intention is to live my divine purpose. So what does that mean exactly? And some days that could just mean taking care of myself and self-care. And I think every day is a good day for that. But some days it could be like finishing the audiobook. It could be doing things that are hard, that take a lot of work. But, on the other side of that, it's very rewarding and it's serving people. It's serving my purpose is connected to serving people. So I think, yeah, I think we can find a healthy balance between our comfort zone and being outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah, I mean, I've got that written down here actually is my next question too. Is like, kind of what's the finding the right balance of growth? How do you keep yourself from say burnout, especially as an entrepreneur, or especially, or even how do you find, like you were saying, there was a point where it was pretty scary, divine intervention, but then it's like, it doesn't sound like you're driven by fear. As far as I can tell, you're driven by an abundance mindset. How do you maintain that, right? Or what do you do when you catch yourself in a fear-based mindset?
Well, I think that a lot of people think abundance is like having a Ferrari. They don't understand that abundance is simply having food in your fridge. Abundance is simply having walls to, a structure of your house to keep you warm. Like that's abundance. And I think as soon as we start tuning into gratitude of what we already have, that's when we unlock this energy that we're able to then get more of what we're already seeking, which really is not money. We're trying to seek security. We're trying to seek safety. We're trying to seek love. So, that's really where that abundance mindset is really useful, is like instead of me getting up and saying, oh, I wish I had this and I wish I had that, which is what's going on a lot of times even when people are praying. So instead of that, I'd rather say, oh, thank you so much that I have that fresh water in my house, and then I have the food in my fridge, and then I have already what I have, like that. Now if I do need my if there are needs and money that is needed to have, it's like, okay, well, let me ask for help then. Instead of like trying to say that I have it all figured out, let me actually humble myself and surrender and being able to ask for help and see what happens and not judge where the support comes from. And I think that was the big epiphany in 2021 for me, is asking for help and then allowing the help to come from wherever it's going to come from. Because anything else of me controlling that is an ego. That's an ego based mindset. So I was able to let go. So abundance is a very powerful shift, from where we might be living in this current moment. But it doesn't mean that we're aiming to be millionaires. It just means that we're being abundant in our emotions. We're being abundant in our mental state. We're being abundant in our spiritual state. So that to me is like the shift. And once you start asking for help, be ready because it's going to come. It might take 3 months. It's coming.
Uh, so, I mean, you're also not asking. You're saying that you're letting go of the control, right? So the timing, while it's great if it happens sooner than later, it sounds like you're also just being open to it and allowing for it to show up when it's absolutely probably most needed. It probably shows up right then.
Yeah, because it could be a friend calling you out. And you're like, wait,
Mm.
that's not the help I wanted, but you don't get to choose it. You don't get to choose it. And that's my point. You might start
Right.
asking for help, and all of a sudden, someone calling you out on your behavior that you didn't even see. And that's
Mm.
the beauty of it. You can't dictate then what it is and where the help's going to come from. So it can be unexpected. But that's the whole point of staying surrendered and hoping and open to what is to come. And that whole idea of surrender is not a word that a lot of men like, because they're operating from this wounded masculine idea that they have
Mm,
to do everything themselves. And I
right.
did that too. They used to call me Stressy Jesse. Okay. They used to call me that for a reason. That wasn't
Right,
like,
right.
that people are really calling me that. And it's because why? I try to control everything. I try to
Yeah.
control everything, and I try to do everything I could not to ask for help. Even in
Mm,
recovery, I'm talking about no
sure.
asking for help.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't need you. I've already been through all this stuff. Like, all I can do, I'll just have my own goals. And you know what? That's why, to tie it back to the intentions, because, whoever needed to hear the intention talk like 4 times is coming up. Because here's the thing is, I was the goal master. I would set so many goals. I would crush goals. I have all these certifications that I've done, not just heart math, all these ones. And part of me having those, yeah, of course, some is just like, oh, I want to better myself and get more education. But some of that is unworthiness. I was doing
Mm,
it out of a sense of validation and worthiness. And this
yeah.
is what I mean. When you start to ask for help, you might have a friend who's very connected to you and knows you, and they start to tell you this, that, brother, you still feel unworthy. And it's like,
Mm,
whoa, damn,
yeah.
ouch.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. That's now, Jesse. That's super powerful. As a matter of fact, I was talking to another friend of mine who's putting some of her own stuff together, and she was just talking about. She goes, "Well, is it going to matter that I've only been a professional for XYZ period of time?" I was like, "No, just put yourself out there and start walking towards it." I mean, everybody started at a certain level at some point, and I think to your point, that's it's some unworthiness, right? I'm not good enough to do X, Y, or Z, even though maybe I'm really good at it already.
Yeah. I mean, there's people way more talented than me, Brandon. Way more talented to me. Like, I meet people all the time. They were professional singers and actors and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, I don't want to write a book and I don't want to do this. And I'm like, you have like 10 times the capabilities I have, and I'm already on my third book. So what do
Right.
you even mean? You are more qualified than I ever was. And so
Sure.
this is where I think we have this, and this is where I tie it back to what is addiction. People think
Mm,
addiction is their uncle who's drinking all the time. No,
right.
addiction is your emotional addiction to
Mm,
unworthiness. So
yeah.
this is what I mean. And so once we start to see that clearly, we can start to say, oh, well then how can I ask for help? How can I
Mm,
get some help so I can start to maintain consistency, accountability, and really go towards these things that I'm avoiding? And and then that really, on the other side of those things, is where you start to emerge as, let's say, the warrior, but the balanced warrior. You're not just
mhm,
being this person who's this tyrant. So I think, these are the lessons I had to learn very much later in my recovery, like recently, where,
right.
it all just happens into the timing it happens in. But, this information, could this have benefited me at 18 or 25? And how, oh my God, yeah. But it's all good. It's all good. It's all good
Right,
because now I
right,
can take it
right,
and really appreciate it.
for sure. You mentioned your divine purpose, Jesse. What would you say that is?
Well, you know, I used to just say purpose. I used to just say purpose all the time. Okay, your purpose, and it's huge. People ask me what's the number one reason people stay in addiction recovery, and I'll tell them purpose. They have some type of purpose. And you know what? Like, eventually one day I was like, you know what? If you're living your purpose, that's divine. Like, that's divine. It means that, like, you're actually choosing to live from your heart, not just your mind. And that's simply what it is. It's really choosing to every day to live from my heart space, use my mind as a tool, but realize it's not my master, and being able to live my life from that heart space. So the divine purpose is simply like, I'm choosing to use my strengths. I know what my top strengths are. So using my top strengths to be able to help people to share their stories in the world, and me helping to help them to see their strengths and show them that their story is important. So that's kind of my divine purpose, is to help others to share their story in a loving and powerful way, and give them a platform to do that. So that's what I do as a professional facilitator or as a coach, is I help people to do that. And then they get to try to figure out what their divine purpose is. But again, here's what's cool about your purpose: it changes. So you might be like, okay, this is my purpose. And guess what? Coronavirus hits, guess what? Something else hits in your life, a storm. And you know what? It's all good. And your purpose starts to shift and change. And that's cool. It evolves. So it's, to me, it doesn't have to be a set in stone thing. It never is and never has been for me. And But yeah, I um I like to think it's divine.
I look, I'm all about it. Obviously, in spiritual dope, right? Being
Yeah.
being in this space, and the divine is to me, it's a mindset. Divinity is a mindset, right? And grabbing hold of that, and then allowing yourself to be filled with that, just it's a game changer, right? Speaking of spiritual dope, I always think about like the whole idea. It sounds like your hit of spiritual dope is having somebody see that breakthrough moment or something like that. What are some other like hits of spiritual dope for you when you're filled with I think you talked about it being in your flow states. What's something that gets you in the flow state or um into feeling connected to source?
Well, I mean, I love nature. I'm an earthy person. I love being outdoors. I love doing earthing. I never wear shoes. I never wear socks. You're going to see me always barefoot every day, 365, even in New Hampshire. Like, yeah, I wear shoes when I need to, but like I'm barefoot, because I love to be connected to the earth. I live in New Hampshire. I have beautiful forests all around me. We've got the white forest. We got the national forest not far from me. So my big thing is connecting with nature. So it's connecting with the wildlife. It's just being outside and feeling connected to this like planet. We're like these little ants on this planet. We think we run everything, we own everything, and it's like, we got to get humble because we don't. And just feeling connected and part of nature feels, puts me in the flow state. So that's kind of and even my house, where I'm living, you can see behind me there's plants everywhere. I have two big plants right here. I got a huge one back there that's over 25 years old. All to the left of me is plants. I have a running waterfall. So these are things that just remind me of what's important. And so another way that I get into the flow state is facilitation, because what I like about it is I'm not that, like I said, the guru. I'm actually asking questions. I'm asking questions that are inquiring into people's lives or business, and they can actually take the time to answer the questions themselves and then talk to each other. So it's really, that makes me excited because I don't have all the answers. And I let them crowdsource answers, and then we come up with the best answer together, because the answers that they could come up with are much better than what I could come up with. So it's collectively, using our strengths together to you know come up with solutions. And by the way, I do this in addiction recovery. I do this for states. So the state of Georgia I work with, and I help them to come up with different solutions to crowdsource addiction recovery. So these are lived experiences that help me to be in that flow state. And I would say my book that I just released, absolutely, I didn't think of myself as a writer until I wrote this last book, and I realized, like, oh, maybe I am a writer. I mean, I don't write every day, but my next book, it the confidence I have to write the next book is because the last book I wrote, now I'm doing the audiobook, when I'm reading it back to myself or hearing it, I'm like, wow, I actually did a pretty good job with the writing of this book, the actual art of the writing. And so, so I guess writing can put you in a flow state too.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What's the latest book that you wrote?
The latest book I wrote is called If Not You, Then Who? Harness Your Strengths to Shift from Addiction to Abundance.
Nice. High level, target audience.
Well, the high level is the beginning of the book. The first four chapters is my story. I literally write it like a memoir. So it starts out
Mm,
as a memoir because if you're in mental health or addiction recovery, it's all about stories. It's about hearing that story. We want to connect the stories. So I started off with the story, and then the final five chapters of the book, or the six chapters, but the five chapters, the meat of the book is this toolkit. It's a toolkit that I've learned from leaving my job and way before leaving the job, but solidifying when I left the job, I started to learn techniques to become an entrepreneur. And so the entrepreneurial techniques that I learned actually tie into addiction recovery. They
there you
actually
go.
help each other. They feed off each other. Because if you're in addiction recovery, you're trying to live a self-directed life. And a self-directed life is what entrepreneurship is about. So you're
Yeah.
trying to reach your full potential. You're improving your health and wellness. This is the definition of recovery, and it also applies into entrepreneurship. So the book is like 10 years of things I've learned from mentors and coaches, but it's also recently in the last 4 or 5 years learning from mentors like Hal Elrod and John Berghoff and all these different people that came into my direct experience that helped me to see, like, whoa, these are tools we need to be using in addiction recovery. This isn't stuff
Right.
we can put off because we're looking at what's happening in the world and the decline of life, of human life, with the opioid, issue going on and all the things that are happening. What we're doing is not working. Some things
Right.
are, a lot is not. So the
Sure.
book is, if you say the target audience would be for someone who has a family member or themselves are looking to live their best life, because I chose, instead of writing a memoir, I chose to write a self-help memoir, which has
Mm.
a 5 chapter toolkit, which is called Fears, actually.
Okay. What's that? What's the acronym stand for?
So Fears is focus on your recovery, elevate your recovery, appreciate your recovery, resilience and recovery, self-care and recovery. And there's 30 action steps. And within each of those is, to me, having that complete life, is to have that abundant life. If you're doing those 5 actions, which is really 30, but if you're thinking about, how do I focus on my recovery every day, your recovery might not be from drugs and alcohol, folks. This is what I'm
Mm.
trying to say here. This
Right.
isn't
Right.
this isn't just substances. Could be recovery from caretaking, recovery from people pleasing every day. And so, how
Sure.
do I stop doing that? You do the steps in the book that help you to live your purpose. And that's really where
Right.
it leads to. And focus, so I won't break each of them down, but that's what it is. It's a way to, like, what helped me and the men that I've been teaching for over a decade, in women, but a lot of men, it's like, how do I do it? And that's what I put in the book. It's like, here's the start. And then from there, you read your next 10 books. But here's a book that's going to get you started. And, it's just my life experiences.
Nah, it sounds powerful, Jesse, and I think to the extent of separating men and women from the I think obviously they're intrinsically different, right? And how this journey goes, and to be able to have somebody such as yourself, that's really tuned in to how the male processes this and goes through it, and to have somebody lead them through that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's ironic is I coach more women than men, but that's just the way it works out in the private practice. But
Sure.
in reality, when you're in early recovery and then I left the job, it's like you go to a lot of these places and it's men and women separate. So like when I
Right.
was first starting out running workshops, it would be with men. And so
Mm.
and then today I realized, like, yeah, I can run workshops for both, but I can tell you that if I just niche down and start to really focus on men, I'm going to help a lot of men, because a lot of men don't trust their intuition. A lot of
Right.
men look at things as weaknesses that are strengths. So this is where, like, kind of my heart is to help those men.
For sure, for sure. And I think that you probably found, right, especially in Western society, is that men are very head driven, right? And you're talking about the heart and head coherence
Yeah.
piece, and getting them to make that connection and to trust it just a little bit. And I think that's powerful, and I think it's awesome that you're doing this work, Jesse. So let me break this down for you. We've got just a little bit more longer here, and what I like to do here is what I like to call kind of like a spiritual speed dating, Jesse. I'm just going to pick like one question that out of this bank of questions, and I don't know. There's somebody out there looking for their next spiritual date, and you could be it, Jesse.
All right.
Let's see what we got. What does it mean to live in the present moment?
Yeah, for me, living in the present moment's everything. I spent most of my life with anxiety, which is living in the future. So living in the present moment, I do everything I can to live in the present moment. I'm literally standing on a grounding mat that's connected to the wall right now. So I'm always trying to stay in the present moment. I'm trying to live right here. I'm trying to look you in the eye right in this moment and be with you now, and just just not think, just be, so that I can just
Mm.
allow whatever is coming out of me to come out of me. I didn't know what I was going to say today, and that's how I like to live my life. So that is the present moment, as I can clearly hear that subtleness of intuition and being able to trust it, that it's leading me in the right direction. Trust my feelings. I can't feel my feelings and emotions if I'm not living in the present moment. I'm going to be stuck in some type of battle between the future and the past. And I already spent enough time living in the past, and I spent a lot of time living in the future. So I know when I'm living in the present moment, and it's real simple. It's I can hear my breath. I can hear my heartbeat. I can be with you right here now. I can hear what I'm saying. That's me being in the present moment. So being in the present moment is everything for you to start to live, is connected to your purpose.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks. I love that. What else we got here? Get one more from you.
All right.
Do-do-do-do. What is your one wish for the world, Jesse?
Oh, that's a big one. I mean, there's probably a few, but I would say one of the big wishes is to understand what addiction really means. And I think if we can start to understand what addiction really means, we're going to change the whole world. So that's my hope, is to understand the definition of addiction, and to understand that addiction is not simply your uncle who struggled with alcoholism. Your addiction is you. So that's, once we understand that, we're going to have a lot more compassion for people. We're going to understand that people are fighting daily battles every single day. Your parents are fighting battles. Your cousin, all these people are getting these difficult situations that are stemming from addiction. And so I think for me, it's like, once we start to understand the definition of addiction, that it's not just a genetic brain disease and you're doomed. It's as simple as, like, all I keep doing is I keep going back to my unworthiness every day. That's my primary addiction. And so when we start to know that type, that there is also emotional addictions, I think that's going to change the world, because then we're going to band together as as a tribe and say, how can we help each other with our addictions? Because we're all numbing out in some way.
Yeah, Jesse, I think that's powerful. I love how you've kind of reframed addictions beyond drinking and drugs, and really just kind of put it into a space of a couple of places you put it into that resonate with me is the numbing out,
Yeah.
right? And then the unworthiness, kind of loop, right? Getting
Mhm.
stuck in these loops as an addiction, right? And recognizing those as addictions, and if we band together, like you're saying, and kind of act as one against it, not even act as one against it, right? Like I come from, what can we do for the positive outcome, right? What can we do that? I mean, I think that your group runs through some of you guys. What was it? Appreciative inquiry, right?
Hmm.
I think that's where I learned from some of them, some of those groups. So, what is this positive outcome
Yeah.
of understanding the true definition of addiction, and what can we do to kind of break those shackles, right? Break those loops. I love it. I love it. Jesse, where can people go to find out more about you? Who should be working with you? Who should be reaching out to you? Some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you can find me at my website, jesseharless.com, probably the best place. There's a contact form there. You can grab a copy of my journal. I created a journal to go along with the book. That's free. You can grab the journal there. So I think that's probably where you can understand more about me, who I work with, and what I'm doing in the world. And I don't have a big social media following. I learned that from some of my mentors. That's actually that's not the most important thing. So it's cool. I don't put pressure on myself with that. So I mean, if you want to really reach out to me, you need help, you need something, go ahead and reach out to me. I respond to every single person. So go ahead and reach out, and I'm happy to help.
Jesse, I can't believe you're saying social media presence isn't the most important thing. What did you learn from your mentors that is?
Well, I have a mentor who's very successful in that. He has one of the biggest Facebook groups in the world. But I also have one that has no social media following. He makes just as much money. So
Mm,
it's not about money, it's about impact. And he's making
mhm,
just as much impact without a social media. So it's really shows me that either way. So that's where our ego wants to be like, oh, it's the reason I don't have money is because I only have 1,000 followers, and I can prove you wrong with that one.
sure.
That's what I thought. I was like, oh, I need to get the funnel, I need to get the emails, I need to do this. But here's the thing: is it's you don't have to do that. You can do
Mm,
without that. But it's all about specializing. What do you
mm,
specialize in? Who you're speaking
sure.
to? And having your own platform, and that kind of helps you not to have to create a social media platform if you have your own platform.
For sure. For sure. No, thanks for that response. I mean, I think it's important to hear that, right? And it's not just important to hear it from random people. You've had experience. You know these people that have
Hmm.
been successful, and I think that we also tend to forget that maybe I don't know, no less than 20 years ago there was no social media, and there were plenty of successful people.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. Right. So, hey, everybody, thanks for checking Jesse out. Make sure you go check out his site, jesseharless.com, and learn more about him. Jesse, thanks for being on today. Really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you so much for reaching out. This is great.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode.